Right now you're wearing something. Whatever it was cut by a machine, stitched by a factory, shipped across the world, and handed to you in a store. The entire process happened without you lifting a finger. Now strip all of that away. No factory, no machine, no needle made of steel, no thread spun in a mill, no store, nothing. Just you, a dead animal, and a winter that is getting colder every night. That is exactly the situation your ancestor was sitting in 170,000 years ago. And somehow, without a single modern tool, they figured it out. Not just figured it out. They built a solution so effective that the basic logic of it is still inside every piece of clothing you own today. But here's the thing nobody talks about. We don't actually know this from digging up ancient clothes. Fabric doesn't survive 170,000 years. It rots. It disappears. It leaves nothing behind. We know it because of lice. In 2011, researcher David Reed at the University of Florida was studying something most people would find deeply unpleasant: the genetics of human lice. Specifically, the difference between head lice and body lice. Head lice live in your hair. Body lice live in clothing fibers. They cannot survive without fabric. Take away the clothes and body lice die within hours. So Reed's team asked one question: when did body lice first split from head lice? When did that genetic change happen that made lice abandon hair and move into fabric? The answer came back: between 120,000 and 170,000 years ago. That number is not a guess. It is a genetic timestamp locked inside the DNA of a parasite. The moment body lice evolved to live in clothing is the exact moment clothing had to exist for them to live in. Your ancestors' parasites kept the receipt. But this immediately raises a bigger question. Why then? What was happening 170,000 years ago that made clothing suddenly necessary? The answer is not what most people assume. It wasn't cold weather. Not yet. It wasn't modesty. That idea came much, much later. What was actually happening was something happening inside the human brain itself. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, had existed for over 100,000 years before this point. But for most of that time, they lived in one place: warm, familiar territories. The brain was already large, but it was being rewired into something new. Scientists call this the cognitive revolution, a period roughly 100,000 to 70,000 years ago when the connections inside the human brain reorganized in a way that had never happened before in any species. What changed was not intelligence. What changed was time. For the first time, a human could sit by a fire at night and think about something that hadn't happened yet. Not just react to hunger or danger in this moment, but think, what if tomorrow is colder than today? What if we move north and it gets worse? What do I need that I don't have yet? That single shift, preparing for a future you can imagine but haven't seen, is the thing that separates humans from every other animal on Earth. And the first thing that newly wired brain decided it needed was something to wear, because that brain was about to take its species somewhere very dangerous. Around 70,000 years ago, humans began leaving Africa in large numbers for the first time, not because they wanted to. Population pressure, resource competition, and shifting climate patterns pushed groups toward the edges of the continent and beyond, into the Middle East, into Central Asia, eventually into Europe. And as they moved north, they encountered something their bodies had never once evolved to handle: cold. Not the cool of an African night. Real cold. Winters where temperatures stayed below freezing for months. Environments full of food, large animals, rivers, forests, but where standing in the wind for 1 hour without protection could kill you. A human body in that climate without covering is a body that is dying. So they looked at what was already in their hands. They were hunters. They had always stripped the hide from kills for meat. Now someone looked at that skin and wrapped it around their body. It worked. For about 1 day. Because raw animal hide, once it dries, does not stay soft. It stiffens into something closer to wood than fabric. Picture trying to run from a predator wrapped in a rigid board. Picture trying to throw a spear with something clamped around your arm that won't bend. The very thing meant to keep them alive was now slowing them down in exactly the moment's survival required speed. So they had to fix it. The solution they found is one of the strangest things in the entire history of human invention. They discovered, through experimentation, through accident, through watching what happened when different things touched a hide, that if you took the brain of the same animal, whose skin you were processing, and rubbed it directly into the hide, the skin stayed soft. This is real chemistry. Animal brain tissue contains high concentrations of a compound called lecithin, which coats the individual fibers inside the skin and stops them from fusing together as the hide dries. Every animal, almost without exception, has a brain precisely large enough to tan its own hide. Traditional tanners passed down this observation for thousands of years. Every animal has a brain big enough to tan its own skin. Ancient humans didn't know the word lecithin. They just knew it worked, and they kept doing it. But soft hide created a second problem, and this one was worse. Raw animal skin, even cleaned, even brain tanned, still contains organic material, blood soaked into the fibers. fat deep in the layers. The moment it got wet from rain or body sweat, that organic material began to decompose. And decomposing hide does two things. It produces a smell detectable by predators from a significant distance, and it becomes a breeding environment for bacteria and parasites that enter through the skin and cause infections that, with no medicine and no treatment, could kill you. The solution this time came from stone. Archaeological sites across Africa and the Middle East contain flat, sharp-edged stone tools dating back more than 100,000 years. For decades, researchers assumed these scrapers were purely for cutting meat. Then they examined the microscopic wear patterns on the blade edges. The marks matched exactly what happens when a tool is used to scrape fat and membrane from the inner surface of a hide. Not food preparation, clothing preparation. Someone had worked out that removing the organic material before it could rot solved both problems at once. No decomposing fat meant no smell, no rotting tissue meant no breeding ground for parasites. The hide lasted longer. The person wearing it stayed healthier. They now had clothing that was soft, clean, and durable. But there was still one problem they hadn't solved. It fell off. A hide draped over a body is not clothing, it is a blanket. The moment you ran, it shifted. The moment the wind caught it, it was gone. In a world where a second of slowed movement could mean death, clothing that detached from your body at the wrong moment was worse than useless. To solve this, humans needed to join two pieces of material together permanently. And this required the most precise piece of technology they had ever made. The oldest sewing needle ever found was discovered in Denisova Cave in Siberia. It is 50,000 years old. It is 7 centimeters long. It was carved from the hollow wing bone of a bird. And at one end, someone had drilled a hole so small and so precise that researchers who first examined it assumed it was a modern contamination. It wasn't. Drilling required a rotating tool with a tip finer than a modern pin made specifically to make this needle. The thread was sinew, the tough fibrous tissue running along an animal's spine and legs. Dried, it splits into strong, thin strands. When it is flexible enough to pass through a needle hole. As it dries on the seam, it contracts slightly and locks the stitch permanently in place. For the first time, clothing could be shaped to a body, seams at the shoulders, fitted sleeves, a hood. Material that stayed in place when you ran, when you climbed, when the wind pushed against you at full force. But not everything required a needle. Because simultaneously, in a completely different way, humans had already discovered something else. Wool and animal fur, when wet and compressed, beaten, rolled, pressed hard under weight, don't come apart when they dry. The microscopic scales on each fiber lock into each other permanently. The result is a dense, warm, wind-resistant material that requires no stitching and no tool of any kind to produce. Felt. The first fabric humans ever made from scratch. Not taken from an animal, not stitched together, created through a process. And almost certainly discovered by accident. Matted fur found under a sleeping body after a wet night. Fibers locked together in a way they hadn't been before. Someone noticed. Someone did it deliberately. And suddenly humans had a material they could produce without killing anything new, without any specialized tool, in any environment where animals existed. This was the moment clothing stopped being survival improvisation and started becoming something humans actually manufactured. Everything after this, plant fibers, woven linen, cotton, silk, followed the same basic logic that began here. Take a raw material, understand what it can do, and make it into something that keeps a human alive, in conditions their body was never built for. Go back to what you're wearing right now. Somewhere in its design, the seam logic, the layering, the way it moves when you move, is the direct descendant of a decision made in a cave 170,000 years ago by someone who had no factory, no machine, no store, and no choice. They built the first version of what you're wearing today with a bird bone and a dead animal and a brain that had just learned to think about tomorrow. That is the only reason you exist to read this.